Hey, LonerBox, there are people in my community who've been saying you've been shit-talking me. Is that true, LonerBox? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Holy shit, you have like 50k subs now. Oh my god. Damn, popping off. A 30-minute video. Capitalism and worker co-ops with a response to Vaush. Ugh, 30... Ah. What is watching a YouTube video but reading with your ears? I hate reading. It hurts. There's a specific Vaush point. Oh, we can take a quick look. How long is the Vaush point? Because I want to do Crowder in the timestamp for your convenience. Oh, the Vaush part is the longest part. Oh, no. All right, well, we'll take a look. All right.
Kind of policies. Part 5.
Vaush.
The arguments I've been making...
I like the Sargon voice clip there.
In
Okay, we'll do it 1.25. Not to show any disrespect to my friend LonerBox. Just,
of co-ops might already be familiar to some of you. That's because a lot of them have already been made by a YouTuber called Vaush.
Hey, I know you. You're that jaywalking punk anarchist.
Hi Vaush, how's it going?
hey!
Come here often? And I know some of you
Yeah,
are
from
probably
time
out
to
for
time.
blood, and I'm sorry to be disappointing, because as far as I've seen, most of the arguments Vaush makes in favor of co-ops are correct. The criticism I want to make isn't that his advocacy for co-ops is wrong, but more that it's just a little bit incomplete. Specifically, I think his arguments tend to fall a bit short when it comes to the question of how do we get from here to there? If we want to see a world dominated by co-ops, do we wait for them to organically outshine their capitalist competitors? Do we seize the means of production with torches and pitchforks? Or, God forbid, are there policies we can point to that would support the growth of co-ops in a world dominated by capitalist power? And this is where I think Vaush sometimes misses. There isn't much offered in terms of policy, and discussions often go down the road of the ethics of capitalism, or comparisons to slavery, or weird conversations about coconuts and dick sucking.
Let me
Okay, wait, hold on. We're sticking by the coconut analogies, okay? We're not getting rid of those. However, there's one thing I want to say, and this is a tremendous frustration that I have, and it's that, you know how when I talk about cooperatives with other people, when I make cooperative or pro-cooperative arguments against capitalists or what have you, I'm usually talking about, like, it's more efficient, and it can lead to better this and better that kind of stuff. Internally, in my brain, in my heart of hearts, I hate all those arguments, not because they're incorrect, they are, but because that's not the argument I find most convincing. For me, the argument I find most convincing is one I'm never going to be able to win other people over on, and it's the idea that authoritarianism is immoral. That it just fucking sucks that billions of people around the world have to commit a substantial portion of their life to an authoritarian economic system where they have no control over their workplace, they're an utterly disposable cog in a machine that could replace them at any time. But liberals soy-face that shit all the way up. They don't give a fuck. I used to make arguments like that, but people just call them moral grandstanding. But I think it's a valid concern that we made our country democratic, but most people's day-to-day lives aren't them interacting with the government. Most people only interact with the government indirectly. Most of their day-to-day lives are spent directly interacting with their workplace. And they have no control over it, you know? But it's frustrating because that's not like a data-driven argument. I can make the argument that democratic workplaces increase worker happiness, but man, I'm not going to lie to you guys. When I talk with people and I mention the fact that workers tend to be way happier in worker co-ops, I don't think they care. I don't think that, because all the people I argue with who are like these capitalists, they imagine themselves at the top. They don't imagine themselves as the worker, even though most of them are workers. They don't think like my life could be better. The frustration that I feel day to day, I don't have to have that. It could be mitigated at least a little bit, but they don't think of that. It's just this, yeah, it's just life is suffering and economic growth is economic growth. And, you know, it turns into that, like, when the meteor hits the earth, like, this will be bad for the stock market type meme. You know what I mean? Now, that's not everyone. There are legitimate counter-arguments that people can make to cooperatives. The obvious ones being, of course, like private investment. We talked about this with Rose Wrist, literally just the other day. That's not to say that everyone who disagrees with co-ops is some kind of, like, emotionally stunted, temporarily embarrassed millionaire. I think a lot of them are, though, yeah. That's the argument that I find most convincing. Oh, and just to speak personally, man, even if worker cooperatives were less efficient on average, provably, than traditional firms, I would still defend them because the democracy element is the thing that I care about most. It's just the least quantifiable argument. Now, it depends on how much they reduced efficiency. If, like, reverting to a worker cooperative based economy set us back like 50 years of economic progress, then okay, like, all right, maybe we need to rethink a little bit here. But like a little bit of a downside and you get democracy? Like, damn, it's a pretty good trade, you know? But we don't even have to get that downside. We don't even need the downside because it seems like cooperatives are pretty darn efficient, at least in certain sectors. And in the sectors that they're not efficient in, we can consider maybe selective private commodification, or we can consider giving special economic exemptions, or we can consider decommodifying them. And we can allow the government to run them and allow the democracy to be indirect through the representatives that we elect and they pass policies and so on. Do you think co-ops would slow down development? Some of these questions, we talked about them in the Rose Wrist segment just the other day. It's hard to say. We haven't seen many examples of how well worker cooperatives would handle development in R&D based industries. How well will people innovate in industries built around innovation when we're dealing with worker cooperatives? So say the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is a modern necessity. Without the pharmaceutical industry, we would have already all died to polio or something. I don't know. We need these industries. I have a lot of problems with how they're run, but we need the industries to exist. Will a worker cooperative be able to effectively allocate the necessary resources, the billions of dollars needed to generate effective drugs? Maybe the worker cooperative is just too incentivized to raise the pay of its workers. Maybe government intervention will be required to prevent worker cooperatives in R&D fields from over-investing in their own workers. That is a possibility. That is a thing that can happen. Or maybe the nationalization of the pharmaceutical industry will produce good results. I just want to see more experimentation. I want to see more work done. Well, we need to get the work started, you know? There are interesting arguments to be had here, but I don't think there's any argument against, at the very least, pushing in this direction, you know? All right.
Ask you a basic question, okay? Let's say that you are on a plane, and that plane crash lands on an island, okay? There are only a few survivors. In fact, there are only 2. And you wake up after the first one does. By the time that you have woken up, the other survivor in this plane has claimed all of the coconuts on all of the coconut trees, stacked them on their pile, sheltered that pile with all the wreckage from the plane, and declared they own it. And they say that they would be willing to give you said coconuts if you throw their cock. Now, would you consider that to be a voluntary interaction?
I really appreciate, by the way, that I was all lined up with this analogy, and I made the deliberate decision to use the term throat that cock rather than suck that dick. Because throat that cock is infinitely more visceral and suggestive than just suck that dick, you know? I'm talking to like a former presidential candidate.
Is that a voluntary interaction?
Now, I do agree with the sentiment here. I think it's perfectly fair to say that we live in what Durkheim would have called a forced division of labor, but I do get the feeling that trying to convince liberals and conservatives of the horrors of capitalism can often be a bit of a lost cause. Most liberals are already amicable to the idea of co-ops. After all, they do seem to realize liberal ideals of freedom and democracy far more effectively than traditional firms do. They don't need to be told how bad capitalism is so long as they already understand that co-ops are preferable. What they need is a convincing transitional period.
I half agree with this one. I think that a lot of liberals don't have any rational arguments against cooperatives, but they intuitively don't trust them. Does that make sense? There are liberals who are generally amicable to worker cooperatives, but I feel like it's inertia, you know? You get a couple hundred years of people being used to a given economic system, and it can be hard, even if they're like logically, they're like, yeah, co-ops are cool. They always have some back of their mind argument. They're like, well, if co-ops were so great, why aren't they everywhere already, you know? Well, if co-ops were so great, well, like, really, you think workers can run everything? Well, like, there's some back of the mind thing, you know what I mean? Which actually makes it a little more frustrating to talk with them about this, because since their arguments aren't front and center, I feel like I have to pick away at their disagreements. Like, I have to try to bait them to disagree with me. I have to pull the disagreement out rather than just confront them directly with the things they believe. But I do agree that, like, liberals tend not to be antagonistic to worker cooperatives, which is good. That's preferable, you know? There are also conservatives, by the way, who are amicable to worker cooperatives. Populist conservatives tend to be a lot more amicable to the idea of, to the extent that populist conservatives exist, they tend to be more amicable to worker cooperatives than, their less populist counterparts.
And one that doesn't leave them shitting themselves at the thought of government officials seizing the means of production under an iron boot. Because they're liberals. They were tragically born without imaginations, and they can only envision the future as an extension of things that are already happening. They want policies. And I can forgive Vaush for not knowing about this first policy I'm going to talk about, because it comes from a country that he probably hasn't even heard of before. That country, of course, being the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In their 2017 manifesto, the British Labour Party introduced a network of policies aimed at bringing certain parts of the economy under worker control. Where the old Labour Party preferred to put industry into the hands of the state, the new plan under Corbyn was to democratise the work.
I actually did read about this. Wasn't there a video of, I could be misremembering, but wasn't there a video of Corbyn reading out sections of this manifesto while he was in the back of a car? This was before the 2019 election, I think. Does anyone remember that? He was like, am I misremembering that? I think that happened. He was like reading out segments of it. So I looked a little bit more of it up. And I mean, the Corbyn's Labour Party was pretty far to the left as far as social democrat parties go in, the Western world. And yeah, it's a shame what's happening to the Labour Party right now. Maybe we'll do a segment on it one day. Sorry.
Workplace directly. As the Shadow Chancellor put it, the government wasn't going to take back control of these industries in order to put them in the hands of a remote bureaucracy, but to put them in the hands of all of you, so that they can never again be taken away. One of the policies was the Inclusive Ownership Fund, which aimed to transfer 10% of equity in British firms with 250 employees or more over 10 years, a policy which would have covered around half of the private workforce.
Bernie Sanders also pushed something like this, didn't he? Didn't he say that he wanted 20% of a firm's ownership to be given to the workers, or something to that effect? Or am I referring to the German policy of the same effect? Slowly but surely, we're creeping. A spectre haunts this country.
This was effectively a more ambitious version of the Swedish Meidner plan, and would have also given workers the ability to elect a third of their board of directors. As we've seen earlier, this would have made the companies worker-owned rather than worker-directed. The workers would still be underneath their bosses, but they would have had a new level of control as minority shareholders. So, at the very least...
That by the way, it's not perfect, but that is a very important step forward. Partial worker control is really important because it essentially gives the workers a degree of power a little more comparable to a union without them needing to bargain against the system they work for. They're already a part of that system. It gives them leverage over some key issues, them being able to contribute their vote, Though obviously the extent to which they can leverage their power varies massively depending on the firm and the way in which they control a portion of it.
Least a big step in the right direction. Probably their most radical policy was called the right to own, which stated that if a company is either being sold, dissolved, or floated on the stock market, workers would become the buyers of first refusal.
Yep, we talked, remember? I brought that up with Rose Wrist, that if a company goes under or there's anything else like that, workers are the first ones who get to offer a bid,
Means that they would have the option, if they wanted to take over the company and run it themselves. This effectively would have given worker co-ops a priority over government support, which is currently reserved for traditional firms. Both of these policies, which were backed by the Institute for Public Policy Research, would have involved a massive shift of power away from bosses and into the hands of workers.
Does that ever happen? Yeah, actually, I think there's a really strong precedent for cases like this working out well. Workers buying out their employers. An employee buyout, or an EBO. Let me see. EBO success rate. Did I mean eBay success rate, IPO success rate, ABA success rate, IB success? No, I meant the EBO. Let's just go employee buyout. Let's go that way, huh? Management buyout. No, is this what we're looking for here? No, this is an MBO. Why is Google being difficult with me right now? MBO is a transaction where a company's management team purchases the assets of the business they manage. No, this is a management team buyout, not the employee buyout. Google's trying to hide the truth from me. There might be something about this in Rose Wrist's document. Employee buyout. Here's Investopedia, everyone's favorite info source that they religiously check after the GME conflict. Understanding employee buyout, voluntary severance, corporate restructuring. Do we have a success rate that's listed here? Pros and cons of these types of employee buyouts. We might have to read up more on this later. Google's being difficult. The business professor. Oh, wait, I think I see something here that is a little bit like data. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I mentioned success rate in like 60 seconds, Vaush. LonerBox, you hero. Thank you for saving us the effort. Hey!
What's especially crucial is that, unlike social democracy, the effects of these policies would be very difficult to reverse. However, the Labour approach did have a very strong focus on converting companies that already exist. As for starting new cooperatives, and especially smaller ones, we should look to Italy. In 1985, in a period of rising unemployment and company closures, the Italian government passed the Mercora law. Similar to the Labour Party, it gave workers financial and technical assistance to buy out firms that were closing, but it also went a step further. The law also gave unemployed people the right to take out a lump sum of their benefits as capital to start a co-op with a group of other people in the same situation.
Ooh. That's a spicy meatball right there. That's probably what the actual annotation under the bill passed was.
And I know what some of you are thinking. Getting a bunch of unemployed Jeremy Kyle contestants together to start a business, that's doomed to fail, right? Well, that doesn't seem to have been the case. The Mercora law was a success. It was suspended in the mid-90s by the EU and then reintroduced in 2001 with far less funding, and it still managed to succeed even through the financial crash. Could it be the case that these bosses aren't necessarily as exceptional as people might think they are? Maybe. Part 6. Conclusion.
Oh, you didn't give a success rate of employee buyouts. Wait, was there a number?
To buy out firms that were closing, but it also went a step further.
Give me the number.
With a group of Kyle contestants together to start a business, that's doomed to fail, right? Well, that doesn't seem to have been the case.
There we go. Italian industrial cooperatives have better survival rate than other planet. A survival rate of Italian enterprise was 48.3%, whereas co-ops set up after 27 had a survival rate of 87% as a result of worker buyouts. Oh my God. Look, that's like double the survival rate. Jesus. It's, it should be noted, by the way, that the, 8,716%. For every one worker cooperative set up after 2007, 87 of them survived. They just sprouted up everywhere, you know? I think this was a good segment right here, the Vaush segment. I mean, it's named after me. How could it not be? No, I agree. The Rosebreast document, it's very prescient that these conversations would be had in tandem with each other. But yeah, this is worth talking about. I want to share the light of cooperatives with more people. It should be noted, by the way, that being a part of a cooperative isn't always easy. The fact that you have some degree of say in how it's run means that there isn't the same level of emotional alienation that you might experience in most workplaces. Nowadays, you have no connection to your job outside the paycheck that you get. You go there, if the business goes under, whatever, as long as you can get another business job that has a similar pay rate and blah, blah. But if you work at a place and you get to control, in part, what happens there, sometimes that requires more investment from you. But I firmly believe that that is good and healthy for us. That life was better, at least in this one little way, when people were directly engaged in and responsible for their own work, when they had control over the work they did, and people respected and appreciated the direct benefits of that work, you know? Ye back in the tribal days when people are hammering together some fish trap or whatever you're making, that's something you made, a direct relationship between you and your means of production, something Marx wrote on very frequently, that we are all lesser off since we have no connection to the places we work at. Franchises really make you feel this way. Anyone here worked fast food at a franchise restaurant? I mean, you know, McDonald's, Wendy's, whatever. Anyone here? I bet a number of you have, right? Why would you say no? Just say yes if it's yes. Just one of the things that's most soul-crushing about those places, I think, is that you have no control over what goes on there. Absolutely none. And your manager doesn't either. The manager is just a tool of the owner as well, one step above you, but not at the top. And the owner has to follow corporate guidelines, meaning that everything, every rule, every situation is delegated from some group of bureaucrats who you will never meet, and you have no way of engaging in any personal expression. You know what I mean? The most that you can do at places like that is do a pretty little flower in the foam at the top of the coffee, you know? And that's why they get so good at it, the baristas. That's the only shit they can do. The only shot people have to make something beautiful, and they do it too. I think that if people had an opportunity to personalize their workplaces a little bit, things would get better. And you better believe me, worker cooperatives offer way more opportunity for personal investment in your workplace than a traditional firm would. I just think it's good for people. I know for a fact that I would have had a lot more fun at all the previous wage cage jobs that I used to have if I felt like I could contribute to that place anything more than the bare minimum of my physical labor and my brain time, you know? That would have made me feel a lot better. If I could go in there and think, today I'm going to improve on something. I want to fix this part of the store. I want to change this layout. I want to have a conversation with my coworkers about how we can improve this part. What can we do to maximize the experience for everyone? For ourselves, because I care about us, but also for the customers, because, well, I only get paid if the business gets paid, you know? So it's rough. It is, but happy workers make happy customers, Vaush. Oh God, so true. Oh, and it leads to more summer romance too, okay? Imagine, you know, okay? You go out to a cafe. It's the springtime of your youth. You're 19 years old. You go to a cafe and you order a coffee, okay? And there are two worlds, all right? In one world, the cafe is just some corporate franchise. A lady comes out, she's overworked, she's irritated because she has no control over anything that's going on. She gives you the coffee, oh, have a good one, walks back in, okay? But in the worker cooperative world, okay, she would fall in love with you. All of you would have beautiful mommy GFs right now. If only we could secure worker cooperatives, okay? It's true. Absolutely true. Springtime of your youth. She's happy and invigorated. There you go. Is that an argument that'll work with people? There we go. We're experimenting. We're in the forges right now. We're trying to figure out how to construct the ideal pro-cooperative argument. It's true, though. Actually, back when I did work at a frozen yogurt place, the only time that I ever really developed a relationship with a customer, we would hook up later, was the only time during the shifts that I was alone at the place. Because not just because I was alone, but because it was the only time that nobody was around to tell me not to talk to the customers because there was some other kind of work that I could be doing. Because, the manager is like, if you're talking to customers, you could be mopping the floors, which sometimes you've already mopped the fucking floors, But with nobody around to tell me to mop the floors for the 7th time, I had the opportunity to strike up some conversations, How would this extend to larger companies? Would it be department-based? There are a lot of ways to do that. You can make it multi-tiered. You can have a huge pool with like broad representative elections for managerial positions. There are a lot of ways to handle that, which I might talk about more in the future. But one thing at a time. Thank you, LonerBox. Thank you, LonerBox, for the excellent video segment. I love you.